This demonstration is about understanding and using some more of the advanced features within the sculpting tools. So in this case we're working with a custom brush. So if I zoom in so we can see this brush here is a Splat Shape. Now this Splat Shape was one that I created myself. Now just to show you what this looked like, it is this shape here. Very simply a dome raised splat vector. Now it is on its own layer, which therefore means that when I come into the sculpting tools, I can pick one of these layers and that acts as my brush. I can change the size, I can change the strength of it, and I can change the smoothness. So if we look here, we can see it'd be smoother around the outside or exactly as it was. So if I paste one of these down with the straight sides and paste one down with the smoothness, we can see the difference between the two. The first one with the solid sides is more like my existing one, whereas the fully smooth one is a variant of it going up and back down. Now if I take a look at the strengths just so we can see this, we'll go next to the original. We can see it's significantly lower. On the smooth version we'll see exactly the same. Radius, as you would expect, if I put my strength and everything back to nice and sharp, we can see the difference here between the large brush and a small brush, for example there. So this is using a layer as a brush. Now obviously we have the ability to use this brush to actually paint with. So I can hold the mouse button down and I can paint across here. I can go backwards and forwards, but at the moment the behaviour, the mode I'm using is this normal mode. So it's just painting normally, and as we can see it's the deposit brush. So like using the deposit brush normally, it will get larger and larger and larger and build up on top of itself more material. Now for a pattern or a brush like this, it's not really ideal. You just get lots and lots of peaks, like a little mountain. So there are some other options available. I can use the limit brush. And what I can do with this is I can sculpt with this and it will limit it. But what it does do is it does create a flat piece where they overlap. Now in some cases this isn't too much of a problem at all for us. In other cases we may not want that flat piece there, so we can use it as a stamp. So it will stamp it into place. So just to show you the difference between all three, this is stamp. As we can see, there is no flat piece. We've got our splat moving all the way along. If we look at our limit, it does actually limit it to the height and end up with a flat piece all the way along the design. And obviously our normal or our traditional way, it keeps adding material up and up and up till you get higher peaks. So for example with a texture or a stamp, for example, you're more likely to use something like the stamp tool. So let's go back and try some of the other variations. So if I take a look at normal, use my splat, I can actually scatter this at a distance. So let's zoom in and let's just paint across. So as you can see, it's scattering it with a distance of 10 millimeters. I can vary this to 20, for example, and we can see it spreads it out further. If I go up to 50, do it down the bottom, varies the pattern everywhere. But this is within the normal mode, so it will, when it overlaps, certain pieces will get higher and be on top of each other. For example, this section here. Again, a great tool. I'm going to set this to 20 and just paint at the top and compare these. So that is the scatter distance of 20 with normal. If I put the scatter distance with limit, we can see that rather than adding it, it limits it to height, and you get the flat sections here. We'll do exactly the same with the stamp tool. So at no point do we see the flat pieces we see here. We see the stamp everywhere across. So again, working with the stamp, if you're working with a pattern, is great. Now this may not always be the case. If you're working with, for example, the simple dome, simple deposit brush that's round, you may not want the stamp. Also, there are other options available. So let's take a look at some of these. So if I take a look at some of the other behaviour now, and take a look at the thickness. So on stamp, if I set a thickness of 3 millimeters, and then the next one of 7 millimeters, and the next one of 15 millimeters, we can see it's going to stamp it to the height of 15, 7 and 3 millimeters. If I go over to the limit option, 15, 7 and 3, we can see that it does it rather than stamping it, it limits it, so we can see the flat sections where pieces have gone over each other, and again on the 15 millimeters just in this section here. So you can specify an exact thickness or a height of this. The stamp tool has one more option. I'm going to turn off the thickness but put an interval. I'm going to make my interval 20, and I'm going to turn off my distance just so we can see what's happening. So it's doing a interval between one and the other of 20. If I set this of 10, significantly closer together. If I introduce the distance as well, it will go across 10 but also spread it out randomly, as we can see. If I change the distance to 3, it will be closer together, of a variation of 3 millimeters in either direction. So you can see from this there are a number of different variations of what you can do with patterns. Some of my favourite pieces are just using the interval itself, making them relatively close together, so changing my interval for example to 5, which just allows me to be able to create patterns round and round and round and however I want, using my stamp, my tool and so on. Great for example for making some unique textures over models, which we'll show you later in other demonstrations. For example, we'll use fur for this. So this is just a brief introduction to some of the advanced tools within the sculpting mode.